So Canessa Gallery's been here 50 years, and one of the things that's been hard is to figure out how to make the shows available to everyone. We finally hit upon an idea that if we interviewed the artist and made photographs of his work, then lots and lots more people could see the show than the capacity of the place, which is only 49 people. Canessa is a product of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers over the years. It's not really a commercial gallery. And we've followed Richard Register for a long, long time, because our view of the world was that you could make it more commodious and more alive if you didn't smash it up with too much construction. I was lucky enough to talk to Richard Register a month or so ago and remind him of his automobile, which he parked on the streets of Berkeley and filled with a garden, dirt, garden, vegetables.
Took the top off with an acetylene torch first, of course.
So
made it a convertible. It wasn't built that way.
So I am to interview Richard, and I guess I'll start with the fact that how in the hell could you think that a car full of vegetables would solve the world's problems?
That's a pretty good question. Well, it does in large measure, believe it or not, because cities have been redesigned around automobiles since the 50s and 60s. And in so doing, they've become the most vigorous assault on climate change, species extinction, and death on the transportation system. With over about now 40,000 people a year die in car crashes in the United States, a lot, 1 million in the world. So it really has become this kind of a convenient, freedom-inspiring curse upon the planet. And if you design cities very differently, if you design them for pedestrians, there's no reason why it couldn't turn a net benefit to evolution and ecology on the planet instead of being negative. Cities could run on renewable energy. They could recycle assiduously. They could minimize their size, have less building materials in them, and so on, if you build for pedestrians instead of paving the place and having redundant driveways and garages and big parking structures inside buildings and under buildings and freeway interchanges everywhere and so on. So the automobile has an absolutely gigantic impact.
Well, so I had 2 children, and when they got to be 16, I said, now you can get your driver's licenses. This is only recently. I said, okay. About 6 months later, I said, oh, by the way, you guys aren't crazy to get driver's licenses? Yeah, Dad. Another year passed, and they finally decided they didn't want to drive cars.
Really? They live in San Francisco? Yeah, well, a decent city makes that possible, but if you built a city around the automobile, suburbia, it's really hard to get away from using cars. You get stuck with it in that kind of environment. Cars and sprawl are like trains and rails. You have to have the rails to go with the train, and the trains can't operate without the rails. So if you have a city that's scattered all over the place, you need the proper vehicle. And the proper vehicle really is a car for that infrastructure. But it's a gigantic infrastructure, requires enormous amounts of energy, paves over maybe 5 to 10 times as much land as a pedestrian city could operate. And so it has this phenomenal impact that's not understood well enough. For example, Jerry Brown is starting this conference on climate change just next week here in San Francisco. It's an international conference. And it doesn't appear that ecological city design heading towards a pedestrian city designed around the human measure, is actually a subject there. And it's the case all around the world that that's pretty standard. European cities have mold core. In most cases, that is very pedestrian. But in the United States, whole cities have been built on cars, like Dallas-Fort Worth, Phoenix, Arizona, Los Angeles, and so on. So it's interesting. And
well, I've seen, going out to Sonora and other places, I've seen Caltrans in love with the Board of Supervisors. So you suddenly find that the guys just love some more highways, freeways, roads, shoulders, and all the rest. Now, Caltrans is of a good mind, good heart. They try to build things that don't fall down. How would you corral a giant bureaucracy like that and get it used to not building more cars, because more highways make more cars?
Well, there's this kind of a myth that if we shifted to renewable energy systems and a different way of building our cities and transportation systems, that there would be vast unemployment. But that's a planning problem, because there'd be plenty of jobs if the automobile industry, for example, were making streetcars, elevators, moving conveyor belts like you have in the airports for people, small vehicles that are little electrics that run around neighborhoods and things like that. And then you could take trains, as you used to be able to do here in the Bay Area, out to some of the small towns around, and then take a rental vehicle or even a horse or something out into areas that are genuinely really rural. I had friends who used to do that. In fact, they'd catch a bus in Berkeley, go to the train, take the train up to the Sonoma area, take a little tiny train, went out into a few places. Probably was subsidized by the logging industry at the time, so probably that wasn't the main source of the railway income. But in any case, you can imagine that if you had a rails and pedestrian design for cities, it would be far, far energy efficient. You just walk out the door basically a few blocks away from your house, be in the country.
When I was a 14-year-old kid, I came down from the hustings up in Oregon. And in San Francisco, I was able to ride across the Bay Bridge on a trolley. Mm-hmm. And I also, later on, rode the last ferry in the Bay, run by the Southern Pacific Company. And the Caltrans at that time wrote a huge master plan of what the future was for transit in the Bay Area. And they had one page on, well, ferries, they didn't work very well, so they're not around anymore. Now we have a plethora of ferries, more every year. And how do you expect that? I think the problem with that is they're not connected to anything when you come to the ferry landing.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things about ferries is they're actually not as energy efficient as rails by any means. They're not really good in terms of energy efficiency, but they're hell of fun. They're a sociable way of moving across the landscape, except it's a waterscape in this case. And the ferry stories that used to be what life is all about here, going from East Bay to San Francisco and back, was like a rolling party. They'd be out on the water, there'd be bands on the boats. It's just sort of a wonderful thing to do, to get into your bioregion, to feel like you're part of the nature that's happening in your place. And of course, here with San Francisco Bay, we have a fantastic resource, wonderful, beautiful place to be enjoyed. So a few ferry trips, a little bit more energy. I think it's more energy efficient than cars, but it's as an alternative to cars, it's one of the least energy efficient. But that's okay. Energy isn't everything. If you have a nice solar energy situation, if you have a more reasonable population, if people aren't quite so greedy to have lots of material things, all those things get better and better and better. So you can imagine living in a very healthy situation.
Now, I'm curious about the range and scope of your outreach. And I suspect that looking at the writings as they're passed around, your ideas of eco-cities have spread globally. But maybe you could give me some idea of that, because it's improbable that a guy like you sitting in Berkeley would have his ideas spread globally, particularly something as esoteric as an eco-city.
Right. Well, I'm in Oakland for the last 15 years, probably, but that's...
I thought you used to be in Berkeley.
I was for about 28 years.
Yeah, right.
Quite a while.
Better go way back.
Yeah. But anyway, what were we talking about? What was your question?
Well, I wonder, I think...
Oh, the international part. Yeah. Okay, well, I discovered that it was hard making progress here in this country because I think everybody loves their automobiles so much. Simple as that. And I have to admit, my courting was picking up girls at the hamburger stands. That doesn't sound too romantic, but that's what it was where I came from, New Mexico. I lived in New Mexico as a teenager. But I decided to try to go more international, and then by coincidence, once I had a couple of books, starting around late 1980s, people started surprising me by sending emails to say, would you please come to Europe? Would you please come to India? Would you please come to China? And so on. So I've been to China 25 times, and Korea 15.
That, of course, was because books were distributed. It wasn't because they knew you were lying around here waiting to be invited. The books really did it.
I think one of the things that really did it is the fact that it's a relevant thing to be talking about, and certain people catch on to that. It's a big issue. Cities are the largest things human beings create. And if we're creating them to be very destructive in their normal functioning, then that's a serious thing that needs change. So that's what I've been engaged in, where people will have me. And so when people had open minds, mostly in foreign countries, I've spoken in 37 countries now. I've spoken in 37 countries.
Oh
now.
my God!
Yeah, I'm a real
global
CO2 monster. My ecological footprint is disastrous. So I better hope that I have real leverage to change things. In the millions of people, maybe it's possible. I mean, for example, the Chinese like what I do a lot. They have a program. It's a national program to build eco-cities. Now, their eco-cities are missing a lot of the features that I would like to see, but they have some of the features, and they have a program to try to promote it. The problem in China is they say, you had your chance with the automobile, now it's our turn.
Too bad.
They say it, literally. And I was in the back seat of a taxi with a Chinese fellow in Beijing once. We were talking about, what do you do? I do this and that. What did I do? Well, I work for ecologically healthy cities, bicycles and trains and renewable energy, those sorts of things. And cars I said cars are a real problem. And you have to sort of move back from cars. You can't do it all at once, but you need to gradually extricate yourself from the car-dominated world. And he looks at me and says, well, if I can't have a car, how can I get a wife? And then I flash back on, if I can't have a car and go to the hamburger stand, how can I get a girlfriend? I mean, it's serious.
Flashes back on me in high school, never having a girlfriend because I didn't have a car.
That's right. Oh, you sad guy.
Now, Peter, you just talk a little bit about Peter Berg and Judy Berg, because they're old friends like you are. And Peter went down to South America somewhere and worked on the idea of, I don't think he'd call it an eco-city.
Bahia de Caracas. He sometimes did call it an eco-city. But he did a lot of good work on it. That's in Ecuador. Okay, so Peter Berg, he really.
So you reminded me of Peter because he used to come here when Peter was here.
Right.
And Peter was very much attached to the idea that bioregionalism was his word. Other people would say no, it was our word. But tell a little about how your work coincided with his.
Well, bioregionalism informs what you have to do to work with nature. There's a healthy system in every different bioregion. It works a little differently. Some the people make a living fishing, some they make a living farming, some they have to trade and they work with minerals and manufacture or something like that. And if all those systems are healthy, then you can have a whole healthy relationship within your bioregion and externally through the trade you have. That's a reasonable sort of trade that isn't too damaging. So bioregionalism is understanding, and Peter would say this, the cultural evolution fitting the natural evolution, in other words, ecology. And so it's bioregionalism means it's the life, the regionalism, the region that you live in and the life that goes on there. And it's a very sophisticated approach to ecology is what it is. Because you have to look at the weather, you have to look at the agriculture, you have to look at the means of sustenance, you have to think about the cultures that have been there before, what can you learn from them, and things like that. And Peter had these wonderful things called bundles, and he'd send them out in the mail, and they would be broadsides of poetry, some scientific studies, lots of maps, and really wonderful stuff, short stories. So I used to be an early subscriber to his bundles back in the late 60s,
So did
a long time ago.
So did I.
He was
by contributing to it.
Yeah, well, that seems quite appropriate. Now, so Peter would write the context for the place where the cities are. And I talk these days also a lot about not just eco-cities, but ecotropolis, because different scales make sense for different people. Some people like to and get involved in larger cities, some people in smaller towns and villages even. And all of them are suffering from automobile minutes.
Really. Well, I really want to mention the fact that the books are enlivened, made far more meaningful by your sketches. So the sketches on the wall are sort of surprising, but definitely the bedrock of the books, I think. Of course, I feel oftentimes that words don't work very well, and I like drawings better than words, so there you are.
Okay.